All right. Got some my morning espresso, a little bit of green tea, ready to go here. As a reminder, go to YouTube, subscribe, look at my shorts, go to join the community, check it out. Lots of stuff I post there. If you're on X, follow me. I troll every fucking right-wing MAGA Elon Musk conspirator out there. I'm soon going to have an Instagram. Don't know if I'm going to have TikTok. I'll update you. Go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow me there. Watch it there. YouTube, you have the full videos and you also have the shorts. You can also go to my website, thewayleft.com. Lots of reading material out there. I took all my podcasts off, just loading. It was ridiculous, but you can find all my podcasts on anything, on all the streaming services. But my website's got some good resources, some blog stuff, not really blogs for me, but some good quotes, stuff like that. And then reading, viewing material and the recommendations. Check it out. Some good books. I'm trying to update those as I've gone on. I've done some recent updates to some recent books or some old books. Read the Constitution, read the Bill of Rights, pay it fucking attention. Go to improvethenews.org. Today, income tax. Everybody wants to repeal it. So I wanted to go into this. This is kind of my area of expertise, being got a public accounting degree, got a master's in tax, did all that bullshit, CPA, worked in payroll tax technology. So here I am doing podcasts and losing my ass on Bitcoin. Just kidding. Made some money, lost some money. Just normal guy trying to fight for liberalism. What we're going to go in today is there's a big fight out there. We want to get rid of the income tax. It's unconstitutional. Let's repeal it. So let's start with a little history behind the income tax. During the colonial era, late 18th century, 1700s, early 19th century, early 1800s, the taxes were primarily levied on imports and property. So tariffs and property taxes. The protests against British taxation policies, such as the Stamp Act on tea, Boston Tea Party, played a significant role in the American Revolution. So let me point something out. Everybody says they were bitching about taxes back then. We had to fight against taxes, so we're going to create the American Revolution. The broader point is it was taxation with representation, meaning if I pay, I get to vote. I get to give some input into this. That was the foundational element to push into the American Revolution. We need taxation with representation, not without. We have that now. Now, some would say we don't because, and sometimes I would argue that, is most of our congressmen and women seem to be fighting for the next election instead of fighting for the things that we want them to do. But still, the foundational aspect is taxation with representation. Isn't just taxes. Civil War era. The first federal income tax on income was introduced in 1862 to finance what? The Civil War against people that wanted slavery, against the traitorous, seditionist Southern rebels. This tax was temporary and was repealed after the war ended. It imposed, now listen to these, tax rate of 3% on incomes between $600 and $10,000 and 5% on incomes over $10,000. So at that point, it was taken out. So in the Constitution, it had taxation with representation, but they hadn't imputed a income tax. In 1913, go back to your 27 amendments. I have an episode on it called the 27 Amendments. Do we know them? The 16th Amendment, 1903, was imputed, was signed and declared, and is now part of the Constitution as an amendment to the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution is not the Bible. It is a living document. It changes. It's not a tome. It's not mythology. It is a document that changes over time. The U.S. Constitution came with the first 10 amendments, with the Bill of Rights, and now we have 17 additional ones. I've argued that we need 8 to 10 more. It is a living document. So in 1913, they put in an income tax to levy taxes on individuals and corporations. Okay? So people that want to say it's unconstitutional, it was not in the original Constitution. We then moved to progressive taxation, which is brackets, as we've talked about. There are certain taxes. There are There are regressive taxes, which is a straight line across, which is like sales tax. We'll talk about tariffs. There is progressive taxes, which are rates that go up based on income or whatever, maybe value. Okay, flat tax would be a regressive tax. Progressive taxes would be brackets that go up, and effective taxes would be the effective tax, the tax amount based on your income and what that rate is. So if you paid $16,000 and you made $100,000, an effective tax rate would be 16%. Now you might have went into the 20% bracket, which would be a progressive rate, but you can pay all of it, blah, blah, blah. We've gone over this. Go back to my 30 years of Road to Debt podcast. So there's a brief history of income taxes. Before 1913, it had to be imputed basically as a temporary fix like the Civil War. During the colonial era, that's where it started, the fight for taxation with representation, not just against taxes. Okay, let's move on, shall we? Now, we moved on from income tax. There's income tax rate, and there's other taxes out there, right? So there's other certain types of taxes. So there's an argument out there that income tax is unconstitutional. So what I don't see is there's an argument for excise taxes are unconstitutional. Excise taxes would be things like a gas tax, would be like a cigarette tax, a marijuana tax. Essentially, a sales tax is separate from an excise tax, but similar. Guess what else is an excise tax, essentially? And we call it something else. What do we call it? We call it tariffs, right? This is Donald Trump's unitary executive theory. We're going to reduce income taxes, right? We're going to get rid of income taxes. This is the Grover Norquist. He is a right-wing, no income taxes. All the Republicans sign up for it. We're not going to raise income taxes. And tariffs will be a means to do that. So they're an excise tax in a sense. The reason, then they're a regressive tax. So a regressive tax means that it's one rate for everybody. So if you make $1 million, you pay 5%. If you make $50,000, you pay 5%. That's regressive because it has a greater impact on the person that makes 50 than it does on $1 million. Income taxes are progressive, and the idea of that, of course, the idea of that is that you pay a little bit more as you make a little bit more. That's the idea of that. Tariffs are a regressive tax. They're on imports like we used to do. And who pays those? We do. Corporation might pay it, maybe. But in general, we're seeing that it went from 35 to 45% were being passed on to us. This is the new regime. This is Donald Trump coming in and going, we're going to implement this as an emergency tax act against the world. Horseshit. Targeted tariffs for certain things, but he put that in. Emergency, a unitary executive theory, emergency tax on everybody. So the AP put something out and said, Trump says tariffs have created an economic miracle. The facts tell a different story. Okay. He says this is Donald, the ass clown Trump. Just over 1 year ago, we were a dead country. Now we're the hottest country in the world. Anywhere in the world. Well, we're definitely getting hot. I mean, it's been 70 degrees here all of February in Colorado. So maybe he's talking about climate change. Clearly he's not, because that's a Chinese hoax. We all know that. Come on, MAGA. 2024, the last year of the Biden presidency. American gross domestic product grew 2.8% adjusted for inflation, faster than any wealthy country in the world except Spain. It also expanded at a healthy rate from 2021 to 2023. So the economy wasn't shit under Biden. It wasn't great, but it wasn't shit because inflation was up, but growth was there. Now, growth can be equated in a lot of ways, but let's talk about some other. The numbers for all of 2025 aren't out yet, but during the first 3 quarters of the year, because of Trump's regressive tax strategy, the tariff the world, the tax the world, tariff equals tax and import tax, or the threat of them delivered mixed results for the American economy. The main culprit was easy to identify: a surge in imports, which was subtracted from GDP as American companies rushed to buy. So the U.S. GDP actually shrank for the first time in 3 years, January to March, because we've got to get everything in, because we don't want to pay the tariffs. Growth rebounded, done pretty good. But here's the other funny part. We talk about how great our economy is doing. Trump noted that stocks hit new all-time highs in 2025. He's right. The benchmark S&P 500 went up by 17%. It's pretty good. But short of 71% South Korea, 26% Hong Kong, 22% of Japan, 21% in the UK, 22% in Germany, 29 Hong Kong, 26 Japan. Broader point is, over half the population isn't even in the economy. In the stock market. They don't have 401ks, and they don't have, IRAs. Trump talked about 1.4%. This is the ASCOM. Annual core inflation for the past 3 months has dropped to 1.4%, far lower than almost anyone other than me, the orange-ass clown, the narcissist, the pedo, has predicted. The president is using cherry-picked data to vastly exaggerate where inflation stands. That's how, there's a book called How Not to Be Wrong in Math, and you just cherry-pick data. You pick this part of the graph, you pick this part of the graph, you pick this time period, you pick this time period. That's why the Cato Institute's study on immigration for the last 30 years is so important. That's another pod, and I'll post out the study on community and also on my website. His figure for annual inflation in the past 3 months, which excludes the volatile food and energy prices, is low, but reflects data distorted by the government shutdown in October and November. And of course, now he owns the Bureau of Statistics for payroll data, which they're delaying again because he knows jobs are going down again. Annual core inflation for the final 6 months of 2025 is higher at 2.6%. That is down from January 2025's level, but about where we're at in 2023. So there you go. That's tariffs. And we don't need to go over tariffs much anymore because we've done it over and over again. It's a regressive tax. It's a bullshit policy. Income tax, we're going to repeal it. So what do we want to do if we want to repeal income tax? So prior to 1913, there wasn't an income tax. Okay, so we can go through an idea of what people were paying in income tax at certain times. Okay, so in the Civil War, it was up to 5%. That was 1861 to 1872. We talked about that. They rescinded it, and they didn't have it anymore. From 1872 to 1913, there was no income tax because it wasn't in the Constitution. It wasn't an amendment. So what happened between the Civil War and World War and 1913? What we call this, there's a lot of different names, but the main thing is obviously it's the Industrial Revolution. It's also called the Gilded Age or the Robber Baron Age. So what happened during that era? Well, you had this growth, and then you had these oligarchs, these monopolies, these Rockefellers, these Carnegies, these Vanderbilts that came in and said, hey, we're going to grow this. And what we're not going to do is we're not going to fight for labor unions. Labor unions are not there. What we had was the greatest wealth inequality in America. And now we're reaching it again. And why are we reaching it again? We'll get to that. Trump is a big fan of that era, McKinley especially, because he imposed tariffs, which actually failed. But during that era, the rich really got richer before income tax was imputed. We obviously had income tax in the Civil War. It was temporary. So we want to go back to that era. He's talked about it. We want to go back to the Gilded Age. We want to go back to the Robber Baron Age. World War I. After the invocation of the attacks in 1913, World War I, it went up to 77% because they had to finance World War I. From the 30s to during the Great Depression, it went up to 63%. We're fighting, we're struggling. We reversed the gold standard. World War II, 91 to 92%, 94 to 63, the highest bracket that you can go into. 64 to 81, 70 to 77%. 1982, 50% to 86. And then, based on my 30 years or 40 years of road to debt, based in the Reagan era, post 86 was 28%. Early 90s, 31. 93 to 2000, 39.6. That's the highest bracket, progressive, not a universal effective rate. 2003 to 2010, 35. Post 2012, 39. Since 2008, 37%, the highest bracket. So this is the income tax again. Again, we'll get to the repeal and the argument of that. That's the income tax. So what happened to deficits during that time? Deficits skyrocketed, of course. Taxes during Reagan went way down. Taxes stayed down with Bush, elder Bush, went up in Clinton, surplus, down during Bush Cheney. Of course, they went to 2 wars. They went up with Obama. They went down with Trump, up with Biden, down with Trump. Where has that gotten us to? Wealth inequality, right? We've gotten to the robber baron Gilded Age. Here we go again. The wealth disparity is outrageous. Okay, we've gone over all this before. But I wanted to reiterate because we're talking about income tax repeal. So there's an argument out there, and he's dead now, but a guy by the name of Aaron Russo did a documentary, and you can look this up, America, Freedom to Fascism, covering a variety of subjects regarding the IRS, income tax, Federal Reserve, national ID, globalization, Big Brother, things of that nature. The film has been criticized for its promotion of conspiracy theories, its copious factual errors, and its repeated misrepresentations of the individuals and views it purports to criticize. However, let's talk about something. They talk about the banks own the Fed Reserve. So the Fed Reserve is the independent agency, not as independent now because Trump is all over Jerome Powell. He wants to fire him. Scott Bessent saying he's terrible for this or that. We want to segregate monetary policy from the president because what we've seen in those countries where they control those type of currencies, what we've seen is absolute inflation and fiat currency degradation. That being said, the banks do own the Fed Reserve. The banks own the government. Look at the rescission. So after the Great Depression, what they put after the stock market crash in the late 20s, we put together the Glass-Steagall Act, which was to separate investment banks from regular banking operations, your standard bank making regular loans. What did we do during the late Clinton era, during the Newt Gingrich-controlled Congress? We rescinded the Glass-Steagall Act. And what did that lead to? So that said banks could do whatever the fuck they want. No regulation. Again, how do you become a conservative when everything we've done that we've changed, conservative against regulation? You need some regulation. Glass-Steagall Act goes out. In 2008, what do we have? The fucking financial crisis. Guess who doesn't get fucking prosecuted? The banks who put us in there and the people that voted for the Glass-Steagall Act. We put in Dodd-Frank and everybody criticized that because we didn't want that to happen. Now we're back in the same situation where the banks are basically, too big to fail. Again, I mean, you see Jamie Dimon all over the press from JP Morgan Chase. So we're back in that. So that's Aaron Russo's theory. He's right? We took it off the gold standard in the 70s. FDR chased gold in the 30s. So in a way, that's right. But that's stating the obvious. We still need separation. We need more independence for that. We need an independent audit of that. So Aaron Russo, I could argue, is right in that case, right? Well, one of their arguments is it's unconstitutional because Russo's argument using the Fifth Amendment. So what is the Fifth Amendment? Got to look it up. We need to always be looking at the amendments. The Fifth Amendment is the rights of the accused. Due process, no double jeopardy, no self-incrimination, compensation for takings. This is something that I should look at, including number 4, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, Of course, Kavanaugh's giving a way out of that. That being said. So the Fifth Amendment is the rights of the accused. So the argument by Russo is that the premise one is the government can criminally prosecute someone and put them in jail for information that's put on 1040 tax form. So your individual tax form, if you file it fraudulently or make mistakes, they can collect their money. And if you do it fraudulently, they can open your books and go after you. Then he says, premise two, the Fifth Amendment says no one can be compelled to incriminate oneself. So by filing a 1040, that you've incriminated yourself, you shouldn't have to file a 1040, and then you don't have to file taxes. Bullshit. That's bullshit, right? That argument is a circular argument that doesn't work. I don't agree with it at all. Though the second premise is not completely correct, the main source of error lies in its first premise. If one truthfully reports the amount of one's income, one does not incriminate oneself. So if you fraudulently file your form, well, yeah, then you're a fraudster. If you fraudulently go to the bank with financials and you get a loan and then they find out you were not doing that legally, not only can they take your house back, but they may criminally prosecute you because you committed fraud. So, repeal the income tax. It's against the Constitution. Again, let's go back to some of the premises of the film. I want to go through this, Aaron Russo, because a lot of people are on this. The Federal Reserve System is unconstitutional, has maxed out the national debt and bankrupt the United States Constitution. The United States government. I don't know if it's unconstitutional, but Federal Reserve has not probably done its job as well as we want in some cases. I think you need an independent monetary agency separate from the Treasury being the IRS, the Federal Reserve being over here, and the president being over here. Do we need change? Do we need progressivism? Yes. Do we need to fucking demonize and destroy? No. Federal income taxes were imposed in response to or as part of the plan implementing the Federal Reserve System. Okay, they go hand in hand. I'm not going to argue that. Does that make it unconstitutional or make it illegal? No. Federal income taxes are unconstitutional or otherwise legally invalid. I don't agree with that. The use of federal income tax to counter the economic effects of the Federal Reserve System is futile. I'm sure you can make arguments at certain times. Again, repeal or unconstitutional. So let's just say we want to repeal it and call it unconstitutional. Let's just say we want to repeal income taxes. What does that mean? Okay? What does that mean? So that leads us into what do we collect? What do we collect? Federal income taxes. Now, this is from 2024, federal income taxes. So let's remember what income is. Income is W-2 income, which most of us get. W-2 income that you earn is wages. So wages. 1099 miscellaneous. You're an independent contractor. Things like that. Mostly it's W-2 and 1099 miscellaneous. You're self-employed. You get a 1099 miscellaneous. That's income you have to pay taxes on. You have to pay income taxes and what they call payroll taxes, which I'll get to. So in 2024, 49% of the federal revenue, okay? So 2.4 trillion of, let's say, 5 trillion was collected. 49%. So we're going to get rid of the income tax. We're going to repeal it. Payroll taxes. Now, a lot of us feel like these are already income taxes because they're automatically imputed on income taxes. There's Social Security and Medicare. 6.2% for Social Security up to a certain cap. Medicare at 1.45%, and then a surtax over a cap. That makes up 35% of the federal revenue in 2024, 1.7 trillion. So we are now at $4.1 trillion. That's federal revenue. So 4.1, so we're at 84% of our total revenue, which is about let's just call it 5 trillion for easy. Let's say we spend 7 trillion. So we have a $2 trillion deficit. Corporate income taxes, 11%, 530 billion. So a third of payroll taxes, excise, estate, and other taxes, custom duties, tariffs, 5%. 253 billion. Okay. So we got 84% of the collected revenues by the IRS, the Treasury, is payroll taxes and income taxes. Let's just call them income taxes because you got to pay Social Security and Medicare on income tax. And we're going to get rid of income taxes. So maybe we still have payroll taxes. So we're going to get rid of 49 or 50% of our revenue. So how are we going to do that? So again, 4.1 trillion or 2.4 income, 1.7 Social Security and Medicare. How are we going to do that? So the solution right now is tariffs. Tariffs are going to solve that problem. We're going to get rid of income tax. Trump has markedly put down income tax rates, especially on the top 10%. Basically, nobody's making out on this after tariffs on the bottom 80%. Because of tariffs and the increase in healthcare costs due to the Trump administration's policies, even with your tax cut, the bottom 80% are actually going to pay more out of their pocket than they would have had there been no changes. So we understand. And remember, our growth in 2024 was better than it is in 2025. How are we going to pay for this? So let's look at spend by category. Now, this is a little dated. This is from 2020, so the numbers are higher. For example, Trump has put in that he wants a $1.5 trillion health, our national defense, which would be double what it was in 2020. Double. So when I talk about the $2.4 trillion plus the 1.7, so that's $4.1 trillion of income taxes and payroll taxes, essentially income taxes. We're going to get rid of that. Now, we look at Social Security, 1.1 trillion. Medicare, 776 billion. So that's 1.9 billion. Plus health of 748. So that's 2.6 billion. So our income taxes basically cover Social Security, Medicare, and health. Okay, so we have a $7 trillion spend. We generate $5 trillion. We're $2 trillion short, and we're going to get rid of, at a minimum, $2.4 trillion. We're going to get rid of it because it's unconstitutional, or we want to repeal it because we're fucking tired of paying income taxes. Well, I'll tell you who's not tired of paying income taxes: the super rich, because they don't pay them, and we'll go into that. National defense was 726. It's going to be upwards of 1.5 now. We spend a whole 0.5% of our budget on general science, space, and technology, 0.6 on natural resources, transportation and infrastructure, a whole 2.2%. Our debt is at 5.2%. We spend 219 plus, we spend $1 trillion. This is in 2000. Veterans benefits and national defense, we spent $1 trillion. More than we spent on Medicare. Okay. So how the fuck are we going to do this? We got to get rid of this tax. So I'm going to go through a case study here. Texas is a no income tax state. So there are 50 states in the union. There's either 9 or 10 states that have no income tax. Now, we've already talked about the fact that there are other taxes. So let's take Texas as an example. The great state of Texas. I wouldn't move there, but I do love people in Dallas and Houston. I would never live there. There's a lot of reasons for that. Let's see. Texas. Okay, so they don't collect income taxes. They have social insurance taxes they collect. They have ad valorem taxes, which would be like a VAT, value-added tax. They have fees, a lot of fees. The taxes are excise taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes, and some other transportation taxes. So essentially, they make their money from property taxes and sales taxes and limited excise taxes. Now, their excise taxes are limited because they don't have a high gas tax, because they're the great state of Texas and they want to pollute the atmosphere as much as possible so they can kill off their people, so there'll be less people, so the rich can really live well. My opinion, I think even Exxon would agree with that. Okay, so the way they get their money is through sales taxes. That's regressive, say 7 to 12%, right? I go to the store, I pay. Not every state has sales tax. Oregon does not have a sales tax. Some states don't tax food. Oregon doesn't have a sales tax, they have a higher income tax. Some states have lower property taxes but have an income tax, right? Colorado has, most jurisdictions have a low property tax, and they have about 4.5% income tax. It's one rate, not progressive, which I disagree with. Again, that works much like a regressive tax. So does property tax. If I have $1 million home, I pay 5%. If I have a $100 million home, I pay 5%. We should have mansion taxes. such as Washington has. If you buy a mansion over a certain value, you have to pay a state transfer tax that's larger than the average. Those are things you can implement that are progressive. So what I'm going to propose here is not changes to the income tax. It's ways that we should be getting money. So Texas has this great plan. We're going to move down there. We're going to be well off down there, right? So if I'm making 50 in Colorado, I'm going to pay a little less rent. I'm going to pay 5% less, but probably a little less than 5%. It's 4.5% income tax. Now, if I buy a home, my property tax, but I go rent, it goes up, but my sales tax is going to go up. I'm going to have some excise taxes that probably equate to the same. And I'm going to live the high life. Now, if I'm rich and I move from Colorado, and I'm not saying super rich, we'll get to the super rich. I'm rich, so I move to Texas. I reduce my income taxes. My property taxes shoot way up. My sales taxes shoot up. Am I better off? Maybe. But here's the thing. I'm using Texas as a case study. Let's see where their health and education is pretty important, right? So as a study, top of the 50 states, the lowest performing states in health system performance: Mississippi, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, West Virginia. What do they have in common? They're all red. Lowest health performance. Texas is the only one of those states that doesn't have a tax, doesn't have an income tax. So they're not performing in health for the average citizen. What is their accumulation here? If we look at their education, right? Health and education are kind of important. Bottom 10 in terms of worst overall on education, health, and income. Now, we've talked about in the states before, how the states go. Texas is 43rd. Mixed incomes, but weaker health system performance in the Commonwealth Fund ranking. There's only one blue state below, it's New Mexico. Low median income and poor education metrics. All the bottom 10 are essentially red. We've already talked about this in the states in the Civil War and Marjorie Taylor Greene. So if I move to Texas and I'm making 50 grand a year, my education and health are going to go down. My spend is going to go up a little bit. If I move there and I'm somewhat wealthy, I better be able to afford better private insurance, health insurance, and I better be able to afford private schools because I don't want them going to the standard health facilities because they're not being funded. And I don't want them to go to the public schools because they're not being funded. So that's your balance. Now, blue states rank high on health and education. They also rank high in income taxes. See a correlation. When we reduce income taxes on the rich and we reduce and have no income taxes on the rich, we see wealth inequality. See robber baron and current stage. Now let's talk about the super wealthy. What do? The super wealthy, let's say 500 million or more. That doesn't seem super wealthy anymore, but let's say I'm worth $500 million and I have 500 million, I have 100 million in Bitcoin. And I am a high-end board member at a company. And I need $5 million a year to live off. Do I want $5 million of W-2 income? I do not. Because then I got to pay the progressive rates and I have to pay Social Security and Medicare and all that and the surtax, and it really hits hard. So I'm going to move to Texas. I'm not going to pay income taxes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a limited salary. Let's say it's $100,000 a year. So I'm going to pay my payroll taxes and I'm going to pay my income taxes on that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow against $100 million in Bitcoin. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take $5 million out a year. I'm going to pay interest on that, which would be much less than over here. And I'm not going to pay any income taxes. And I can offshore that money or do a whole life policy and borrow against that. So I'm going to avoid income taxes. This is what Jeff Bezos does. This is what high income earners do. This is what Elon Musk does. This is what Mark Zuckerberg does. This is what left to George Soros, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. I don't want any income taxes. So we don't need a wealth tax that imputes value on your total wealth. So let's say you're worth $1 billion. There's a 5%. This is what you're proposing in California. You pay 5% of your net worth one time. Then you have to come up with $50 million cash. Instead of doing that, what we do is we impute what we should impute. We should have an AMT, an alternative minimum tax, based on not only your income, because if I only have 100,000, AMT doesn't apply. AMT would be an alternative minimum tax on a certain amount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, if your means to an end is 5 million, I'm going to tax you on 5 million. Let's say your means to an end on basic necessities, I'm going to do a means test, is 2.5. I'm borrowing 5 million. I won't tax you on the whole 5 million, but I'm going to alternative minimum tax you at, let's say, 25% on the 2.5, where now I'm not taxing you at all on that. Now that could get really discretionary. We need to break that down. The point is, you can't live for free. You can't just avoid income taxes. Remember, the grift is legal on the top. They have built the rules so that when I get to a certain income threshold, I stop taking income. I take equity in my company. I create charitable donations that go into a trust where I don't pay taxes. I get stepped up basis on estate taxes. Please review the Ray Madoff, Madoff, Boston College professor on wealth taxes. It's a YouTube video. I've posted it on my community on YouTube. So I have ways around it if I have a lot of money. I'm not going to contribute to the system. Not only that, my corporation, Bascent, just went around. So in the Biden era, they put together a minimum rate of 15% for corporations to pay internationally. Because some countries are trying to entice here, entice there, 0%. They said, look, we want a universal one, or we're going to impose restrictions. So they put a 15%. Bascent comes in and says 0. And we've already reduced corporate income taxes. So corporations, they say it's double taxation. Bezos ain't being double taxed. He ain't paying income tax because he ain't taking a salary. And they're not paying any tax at the corporate level. That's not double taxation. Certain people get double taxed, I'm sure. The point is there has to be a base level. Corporations need to pay an AMT. Individuals need to pay an AMT. So remember, we had a $2 trillion deficit that I was talking about. How do we make that up without completely reversing the tax code? We impute AMTs on individuals and corporations. That's one way. The other thing we do is the IRS estimates, because they don't have the funding, because we're not going to fund the IRS. DOGE comes in there and tears it apart. We're going to put restrictions on the IRS to collect. They average about $750 billion of what they estimated that are collectible monies that they can't find based on total like income projections and revenue projections. $750 billion. So let's say I can get $750 billion there. Now I've reduced my $2 trillion down. I want to cut national defense in half from $1.5 trillion. So I save another 750 there. But let's just say I just saved this $1 trillion. What else can we do without completely revising all the tax code? Completely rewriting it, which I'm not necessarily against in some regard. But again, don't demonize and destruct progressive, deal with it, and then change it, modify it. Other thing we can do, Social Security means test, Medicare means test. Meaning, Jeff Bezos made a lot more money than me. And I'm going to get quite a bit from Social Security because I've made a pretty good living. Probably not as much as him per month, but probably close because you can only go to a certain point. Why does he get 100%? It's not a benefit, it's a tax. People say it's a benefit, so they should get their benefit. IRS calls it a payroll tax because it is a tax, essentially an income tax on your income. So, means test. If you make up to $1 million, you get 100%. If you, and some sort of value metric, you go from 1 to 2 million, you get, let's say 75, and 2 million to 3 million, 50, and then anything over 3 million, you only get 25%. And maybe those numbers are 500,000, a million, 1.5 million, 2 million. Let's say I capture another $500 billion off that. Medicare, same thing. You don't get the same plan, depending on your value. You still get something. I'm not about going to zero, because you did contribute, if you contribute. But you reduce a means test for Medicare. So at 65, you only get 25% if you're worth $17 billion. And if you're worth $17,000, you get 100% of your Medicare benefits. Say I made up another $500 billion. I do my corporate AMT. I do my income AMT. I haven't completely revised the tax code. Our tax rates still aren't as high as they probably should be for progressive rates. Save money there. I reestablished national defense as a defense organization instead of a war organization. I restructured. So I haven't changed the whole system. What I've done is made the system pay. Again, there's grift everywhere. but the grift is really at the top, and it's been legalized by the fucking attorneys in Congress that are in place. Capital gains. We should have progressive tax rates on capital gains. There's a change. If you make capital gains of $1 million or less, then you pay the standard rate, which is around 10 to 20%, depending on how much you make. If you make over $1 million to $5 million, you pay 25. And if you make over $5 million, you pay 30. Maybe I made up another $250 billion there. Because capital gains, why do people like capital gains? Well, they pay a capital gains rate, but guess what they don't pay? Social Security and Medicare. And for a lot of those, that's 8-10%. And they don't have to pay personal income tax rates. Guess who gets capital gains? The top 25 to 35%. Dividend income. Passive income. Some passive income limitations. They have those in place, passive income being like rental income and things of that nature. But again, it's circumventing the earned wages, earned being the 98% of us. It's there. So do we need income tax repeal? No. Do we need a little bit of changes? Yes. Is it unconstitutional? Fuck no. If you don't like paying income tax, get off my fucking road. Be a libertarian and buy an island. Be on your own. If you don't want regulation, you get the Glass-Steagall Act. You get the effect of the recession. You get tariffs across the world where the Supreme Court still hasn't judged. You need regulation. You need intelligent regulation. You need diversity in regulation. Not one, not two. It's just like our energy policy. It's all oil and gas now. That is not good. There's a lot of reasons on the climate change side, but just from diversity perspective, it's stupid. So here we are talking about taxes again. And I love that people say it's unconstitutional or I don't want to pay my taxes or I'm not. Some people are getting fucked and some people aren't. But I can tell you the trend is the robber baron narrative. And we put it in place because we were tired of the fucking oligarchs taking over, and we finally put labor laws in. We destroyed the labor market, and now we're redestroying it again. We destroyed the labor market with destruction of unions and power. We're destroying it again with AI. And now what we want to do is reduce income taxes on the fucking rich more and let them get away with more and more offshore accounts and less tax on corporations and less tax on individuals and ways to get around income tax. We need to repeal people getting away from paying their fucking fair share across the board, but especially the grift at the top. And means testing for benefits, taxes like Social Security and Medicare, and credits, AMTs. You got to pay your fair share. Alternative minimum tax at the corporate and individual level. So it's not repeal, it's revise. It's not unconstitutional. It's modified within the bounds of the Constitution and the amendments of the Constitution. Are there issues with the Federal Reserve? Of course there are. Are they as bad as Trump and Bessent say? No. They hate everybody. They demonize everybody. That's what Trump does. This is what conservatives have done forever. They have fucking demonized the fucking government to the point where everybody hates it to the point that they think it's all grift and they blame people like immigrants. See my Cato Institute short pod. They demonize the government. They demonize institutions. And what you get is destruction. And we don't need destruction. We need change. Okay. Well, there we have it. Thank you for watching another pod of The Way Left.